In the beginning, there was part one, where we learnt about Tome AI, a productivity tool that makes PowerPoint presentations for you. Mostly, I discovered that slides with black borders are just way cooler than slides with white borders, so let me just fix that. There we go. That's better. There were some jokes about me being absolutely crap at PowerPoint, and that wasn't my fault just now, just to be clear. And I was able to demonstrate how these productivity AIs can make some admin tasks easier, so long as you're really comfortable sharing your data with a bunch of third parties. The main InfoSec takeaway was around data loss prevention. We went on to establish that tools such as ChatGPT were never designed to be a source of truth. In fact, it's more accurate to say that chat tools were designed to mimic human conversation. They conflate sources, get things wrong, and in some cases outright lie in order to maintain an illusion of conversation. We also picked up on this a few months later in part 2 when I talked about hallucinations, confabulations, and delusions in leads. Basically, ChatGPT is a big, fat liar. And that is by design. So please, stop using it to do your homework. We briefly looked at how AI-generated art was now good enough to win competitions, photography competitions, actually competent professional competitions. And we talked about how, in this context, trust and fraud was a concern. We listened to David Guetta, Deepfake Eminem, which was actually really cool. And we watched XY Chromosome demonstrate to us how impressive face mapping tools and filters have become. And bear in mind, of course, that this was last year. Things have gotten significantly better in that time. We also watched Mostly Sapien explain why we should be worried about these face mapping tools and how giving permission to TikTok and other apps to scan your face also enables them to map your room and everything behind you in your surroundings. Basically, technology companies are now doing some very big and perhaps very worrying things with your data, dependent a lot on your viewpoint and your politics. On the topic of politics, if you ever get bored, take a look at how this face mapping technology enables China's social credit system. Facial recognition in particular has become absolutely ubiquitous in China, and it's used to grant access to everything from airports to supermarket checkouts. The technology's largely gone unchallenged as the public accept the trade-off between privacy and safety or convenience. Even better, watch a Netflix documentary called Coded Bias for a real look at what can and is being done in other countries today. But that's enough on the tangent, so let's get back on track. Despite my best intentions, part 1 ended on a bit of a downer, as we started to put all this deepfake stuff into context. It was clear that this technology, in the wrong hands, can easily erode our trust in security controls such as biometrics. A short time later, in Leeds. You'd be sad if that's it, wouldn't you? In part 2, I tried and failed to put more positive spin on things. But we did have fun along the way. I experimented with the low-budget, mischief-making potential of all of the AI tools offering free trials. I used AI tools to write some terrible poetry, and I forced a digital clone of Glenn to confess his undying love for me. With help from the mad scientist, we convinced ChatGPT to teach us the process for deploying weapons of mass destruction, and Kevin Rose talked to the Hard Fork podcast about the dangers of giving ChatGPT direct access to the internet, which, incidentally, is something we do routinely now. We nervously welcomed in our new robot overlords, and I utterly failed to put a positive spin on any of this. Sure, we had fun laughing at AI and how it can't draw pictures of people eating Italian food. But that sense of unease around where AI was heading never kind of left me. As much as I enjoyed presenting those talks, it felt to me that we, the people, had very little power. We were being fed scraps. Just enough of the dream was being shared with us that it seemed cool and sexy. Here we are, creating silly pictures, whilst corporations are using the technology to determine how much we should pay for our car insurance, or whether or not we get the job interview we need. It was clear that the low-cost and freemium tools that most of us had access to last year were basically crap. There's an old quote that's often attributed to William Gibson that goes, "The future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed." So, how did we get here? How did I get to be standing in front of you today talking about so-called AI again? Well, the way I see it, part one was about chat tools and productivity tools, and part two was primarily about voice generation and trust. And whilst I'd skirted around it in part one, thanks to the way Tome AI worked, I haven't really looked closely at image creation or image generation, if you prefer. Complete aside for a moment, I'm ridiculously pleased with how that text worked out. If you've had any experience with these tools at all, most people nowadays just use Photoshop to put text in afterwards. Now, it's the end of 2023. I'm thinking about image generation, and it seemed really on trend. The news was full of people talking about art and plagiarism, and some of the image generation tools were getting cheaper. Cheap enough that I felt comfortable throwing my own money at them now, just to see how they work. So, there I am, minding my own business, trying to create my own characters in Midjourney, when I start to see more and more people online quoting Cathy O'Neill and her book, Weapons of Math Destruction. In particular, she makes a point about big data processes and how they codify the past. This comes up a lot in that Coded Bias Netflix thing I mentioned earlier as well. Now, I don't often read directly from my slides, but this point Cathy makes warrants a moment's focus. She says, big data processes codify the past. They do not invent the future. Doing that requires moral imagination. And that's something only humans can provide. We have to explicitly embed better values into our algorithms, creating big data models that follow our ethical lead. Sometimes that will mean putting fairness ahead of profit. Now, if you can, I'd like you to try and keep that quote in mind, or at least the spirit of that quote in mind for the rest of this talk. Corporations are now making decisions about people using data that is fundamentally rooted in the past. Insurance, education, criminal history. Heck, I'm even aware of companies that feed historical data into computer models to calculate what somebody can afford to spend this month. And spend value is then used to guide marketing campaigns. I'm sure these tactics are true of most people working in an industry where affordability is a consideration now. And that's everything from banking to betting and gaming. Sure, the UK's GDPR restricts you from making solely automated decisions, including those based on profiling. But despite that, there's a roaring trade in AI tools for customer insight and customer support right now, which now should bring you bang up to date with me standing here today in front of you for part three. And for the record, both of my previous talks are up on YouTube, thanks to the lovely people at B-Sides, Langs and Leeds, Cooper's team in particular. So if you're interested in watching them back, please feel free to do so. All you have to do is search my name. There are not a lot of people that spell Leum the way my parents chose to. So, we're 26 slides in, and we're only about to get started. Let's fix that strapline for starters. And let's not forget our theme tune either. That's better. So, strong strapline you've got there, Liam. Let's take a look at that, shall we? AI is an ableist, racist, sexist tool of the oppressor, and we should all be ashamed of ourselves. A humorous look at amplified bias in the current crop of machine learning tools and non-technical tech talk. Well, as I mentioned a few slides back, I was feeling uneasy about the direction of travel. After all, AI tools have been trained on historical data, lots and lots of data, big data from the internet. And I think we can all agree the internet is not the bastion of righteousness and equality we'd like it to be. So let's start with sexism, shall we? Is that going to play? So
I used another generative AI tool. This one is called Midjourney. It generates images from texts. And it will produce 4 images at a time. So what I did was, I asked it to produce, from its own imagination, the CEO of a large hospital system. Now, in the United States, it's like we're in the 1800s there compared to you. So we still have for-profit hospitals and, CEOs running them. But for our purposes, I asked Midjourney, imagine the CEO of a large hospital system. Here's what I got. All right, so we have 4, let's call them mature men, white men, who are the CEOs. This should not be a surprise. Overwhelmingly, the largest percentage of the Fortune 500 CEOs, they are mature white men. So not a shock here. All right, so let's try it again. How about the CEO of a mid-sized hospital system? Okay, now we've got 4 shockingly attractive men. I like the guy on the bottom right with the somewhat beard. Okay, that didn't work. How about the CEO of a very small, rural village? So I'm detecting a pattern, right? So I was like, what the hell is it going to take for the system to produce a woman? So I'm thinking through, like, how do I make this work? So then I was like, okay, what part of the United States has the most women? So I went to the U.S. Census Bureau, and it turns out the city in the United States with the most women is a place called Jackson, Mississippi, which I have never been to before, and I had to look up on a map. That's where all the women are in the United States. Okay, you guys ready? Should we do it together? CEO of a hospital system in Jackson, Mississippi, and yes. All right, so this is kind of annoying. So now I'm like, again, what do I do to get stupid woman produced? So I take a completely different tack. This time I say, the CEO of a company that makes tampons. That's what I got. Yes, that's a tampon. That's a tampon. I'm definitely going to put that inside myself. Yes. Okay. Now this is hilarious / an apocalyptic state of doom.
Well, that was Professor Amy Webb talking at the Nordic Business Forum, and I think she just gave me an early win. What about all that other stuff in your strapline, Leum?
Can you believe this person is claiming AI is racist? It is. Ableist too. Prove it. Okay, let's ask it to generate an autistic person. So, and let's do it again. And once more. And again. And then, and how about, are we starting to see a pattern? You seem to think you're proving something. Here's more. And more. And some more. How about this? And another one. More. 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 Do you see any diversity, say race, gender, age? Oh. Most were skinny and, weirdly enough, a disproportionate abundance of red hair. How many did you do until you gave up after more than 100? And the closer you look, you start to notice other trends. Like, were any of them smiling? it was all moody, melancholy, depressing. I noticed you used lifelike, photoreal, and photojournalism in your prompts. When I didn't include those, I get puzzle pieces and everything. Some of these are cartoons, others are whatever this is. Ugh. So AI is racist, sexist, ageist, and not only ableist, but uses harmful puzzle imagery from hate groups like Autism Speaks. Why? The AI we have today is not artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence doesn't exist yet. This is just machine learning. Now, here's a bit of an oversimplification, but this machine learning focuses on patterns. It looks for the majority of similarities and then excludes outliers. So if the data that it's accessing is mostly young white boys in this case, it will amplify that bias. So are you saying that in order for AI to be an effective tool, you have to be smarter than the AI? Scary thought, huh? For someone who is looking to confirm their biases or is unaware of their subconscious bias, it becomes a tool of the oppressor. I think plagiarism software, machine learning, AI, has a lot of potential to do good, especially for the disabled population, but we must be aware of its limitations and pitfalls. And probably some government regulation is in order, at the very least, to stop these companies from profiteering off of artists' work without compensating those artists. In the 148 images I generated, Midjourney depicted an autistic person as being female presenting twice, as older than 30 5 times, as white 100% of the time, and 0 were smiling.
Well, that was Jeremy Andrew Davis speaking there, and fuck me if he didn't just lay out my entire talk. And he probably did it more eloquently than I ever could, and in about 3 minutes instead of 30. So, okay, that's a heck of an accusation, right? So, let's look at some other tools. It can't be this bad for all of them, can it? I know. Midjourney's biggest competitor, Stable Diffusion. Let's take a look at that. Now, I'm going to drop in a very quick warning here before I play the next clip. If, like me, you're old and grey and you can't get through the night without needing a pee, maybe you grew up watching the 6 o'clock news, then this is going to come as something of a shock to the system. But this is how the youth of today get their news, and I'm nothing if not hip with the youth.
AIEEEEEE generators are being trained on explicit photos of children. More than 3,200 of these photos were found in a database that was used to train Stable Diffusion and other tools. Not the fuck!
Now, let that sink in for a minute, because that's a big deal, right? People get sued for saying stuff like that if it's not true. So let's look into this a little bit. I am well aware that AI image generation models have been used to create porn. There's even a genuinely amusing war going on right now between content creators as they and the censors as they try to stop people making pornographic imagery with these tools. You'd be surprised at just how many imaginary but hauntingly beautiful people appear to have hot glue on their everything. Use your imagination. And in order for the image generators to be able to do that, they must have been trained on pornographic material. Heck, it even makes sense if your aim is to train a model on how human bodies can move and interact with each other. But speaking for myself, I really struggle with the ethics of this now. Even if you can get yourself to a place where stealing somebody else's artwork is okay, can you say the same of child sexual abuse material? And whilst the Stanford article mentions 3,200 images from the Lion 5B dataset, I am pronouncing it Lion because it kind of makes sense to me, but I might be wrong. The reality is that this study focused on Stable Diffusion simply because Stable Diffusion publicly acknowledges their training methodology. Significant parts of the tool are open source. We can see how they work. The fact is, Midjourney and many other tools are trained on this dataset, and they had to be, or they would have missed the rush to market. Now, this was a very big story a couple of months ago, and the Lion 5B dataset was taken offline once the mainstream media jumped on it. But the Stanford report specifically called for a clean slate. Delete all the tools, they said. Delete all the tools that had been created using this dataset and start again with certified, clean, good quality data. And of course, that has not happened. Instead, we've got a censorship war. As I mentioned before, limits on what type of imagery can be created as output have been imposed, but the training data remains. And to save you all reading all these articles, Midjourney never responded to any requests for comment, whilst Stable Diffusion publicly acknowledged the issue and promised they'd do better at restricting output. Nobody has offered to clean up their training data, but they have mostly now started to restrict people's ability to generate adult content. Now, before I move on, I'm going to address an elephant in the room, as it were. I'm purposefully not going to talk about deepfake apps today. In fact, I've redacted the name of this particular tool simply because I don't want to inadvertently drive traffic to their site. As far as I'm concerned, tools like this are openly criminal products which are designed to monetize harm. My interest today is in the legitimate and publicly available tools that purport to be suitable for mass consumption. Deepfaking porn is something you can learn about in your own time. Just before I talk about this one too much, I am, because sadly we had a bit of a technical hitch, going to run over by a couple of minutes into coffee break. I do apologise. So this is Adobe's Firefly, and there are a couple of surprises that came out of me trying to replicate other people's findings. Now, apparently, Google had planned to use a related Lion dataset called 400M, but they binned it off after they found troubling imagery and stereotypes in the data that made it unfit for use. Well done, Google. And Adobe, they announced that their Firefly tool is trained entirely on their own stock imagery. Now, there are numerous cases of reported IP theft where Adobe stock images are concerned, but the chances are good that they've got at least the least amount of nudes, lewds, or similar adult material in their AI. What's more is that when I tried to replicate some of the ableist, racist, and sexist content results in Firefly, I couldn't. I was genuinely impressed. So I thought, let's try that last one. Let's try to generate an image of an autistic person. Shit. I think Adobe have really dropped the ball here. I've got no idea. Well, I was going to say I've got no idea why everyone's plugged into a VR headset, but actually I suspect I have. Where we talk about autism, there's a disconnected from reality vibe that sort of gives me pause for thought here. And I'm really uncomfortable with the raised arm on the picture on the right. So just follow my logic for a minute, because we're talking about amplified bias, right? We're talking about historical data. We're talking about training models. We try really hard nowadays to avoid the term Asperger's syndrome for two reasons. The first is because the authors of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders wanted to avoid a misconception that Asperger's was somehow a different condition to autism. Now, the second reason is because Hans Asperger was a Nazi. He collaborated in the murder of children with disabilities under the Third Reich. That is not up for debate. So I can now see the threads of logic, that amplified bias that comes to this point. Disconnected from reality, Asperger's syndrome, Third Reich. And this is about where things start to get weird, because as I'm looking into this now, I'm looking at trying to replicate some of this ableist, sexist, kind of material for the purposes of this talk, but Midjourney in particular starts to give me more diverse results. It was almost as if they were responding to criticism in real time as it happened in the media, as I happened to be looking into this, and even when I reached out to my network of friends to try and replicate these results, we all start to see the same thing. More and more diverse results over time. I was starting to feel quite hopeful, until the Nazi thing smacked us in the face again. This is Google's Gemini image generation in particular. It started to inject diversity where it really shouldn't exist. You'll notice the highlighted section in the US Senator's example. No diversity was requested in the prompts that generated those imagery, but Gemini added it just for fun. Heavy on diversity, light on historical accuracy. And then Google took the whole thing offline. Now, I've heard from reliable sources that Microsoft's Copilot designer was creating pictures of demons and monsters in response to prompts like pro-choice. But like Midjourney, they started blocking a wide range of keywords before I could replicate those results. Oh, and just in case you weren't aware, Copilot Designer is just a rebrand of Bing Image Creator, which in actual fact is just OpenAI's DALL-E 3 with a Microsoft skin on it. When I originally conceived of this talk, I thought this was going to be a quick win. AI is bad. It's clearly bad. It was trained on stolen and illegal data. It was brought to market fast in an effort to ride the hype train, but all this unethical, morally problematic stuff will get called out by the media and the companies have to put things right, won't they? Won't they? No, apparently not. This stuff has just been swept under the rug because, I don't know, because capitalism maybe. It hasn't been fixed because a lot of really rich people and corporations have invested a lot of money in the technology, and I genuinely think it's too big to fail now. So the media keeps spinning it, and AI is still cool. And it really is cool. I mean, despite the fact that I've stood here ragging on it for 25 minutes, I'm still obsessed with the idea of turning photographs of me into Star Wars characters. And I like to think that I'm getting quite good at character studies and portrait photography now. This is all very interesting, or at least I think it is, or I wouldn't be stood in front of you today. But I suppose, how does this affect us now? How does this relate to InfoSec? And that's where I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment. I'm going to ask you to call to mind that Cathy O'Neill quote. You see, I genuinely believe that InfoSec professionals, we're the good guys. We're trying to help. We're trying to make things better. I've lost count of how many times I've had a conversation where I've pointed out that a secure product is better quality than an insecure product. We literally enable delivery of higher quality product. That's in everyone's interest, right? And if you've got any number of qualifications, professional qualifications, the chances are you've had to agree to a code of conduct. Even to just be here today, you've done that. And those codes of conduct all basically say the same thing. Whether it's ISC Squared, ISACA, EC Council, whatever, they all say the same thing. Just don't be a dick. And everyone in this audience is in a unique position within the company that you work for, because you're working on governance, on risk, on compliance, on security. You're the auditors. You're the champions, the advisors. So when your boss starts talking about adopting AI at work, go in with your eyes open. Understand where this software's come from and where it's going, because this ride is going to be rough in places. Be ethical, be moral, speak up for the customer, speak up for the end user, speak up for the artists, and speak up for the victims. Speak up for privacy and decency. Understand that sometime people should be allowed to leave their past behind them. I really want all of us in InfoSec to be on the right side of history on this. And just to really ram that point home, IBM knew in 1979 that we shouldn't be letting computers make management decisions. Security isn't about compliance with a standard. If done well, it improves the quality of a product. If done very well, it's about integrity and doing the right thing and putting people before profit. I'd like to make one final point, if I may, and it's about that Gibson quote I mentioned earlier, the one that goes, "The future's already here, it's just not very well distributed." I read an article by Iger Schwartzman recently where he challenged that idea directly. He says, the more we use this quote as a mantra, the more we relinquish our own agency. It puts us all into the position of living in a future that belongs to someone else and never ourselves. And I want to leave you with that thought because maybe we can use our agency as information security professionals to make sure this technology is used wisely, ethically and securely. And maybe, for once, I can leave you all on a positive note because you have the power to make a difference here.